Welcome, everybody, to another fantabulous episode of The Thoughtful Bro, live streaming, as always, on A Mighty Blaze, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and beyond. Thoughtful Bro is here every Tuesday at 2 for what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick, and for anyone who still might not know, A Mighty Blaze is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers virtually during COVID and beyond. At A Mighty Blaze, we are never asking for your money. If you want to support us, all you got to do, as the kids say, is smash that like button. Give us a follow on any social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the places. And if you are, though, in the mood to spend money, please spend it on amazing, shattering, beautiful, meaningful, gutting memoirs, books like This Isn't Going to End Well by our guest today, Daniel Wallace. We're going to put the link in the chat to buy the book. And if you have any questions for Daniel, please put them in the chat as well, and they will make their way to me. We'll leave some time at the end of the interview to ask those questions. And now, without further ado, on to our guest. Daniel Wallace is the author of 6 novels, including Big Fish, Ray in Reverse, The Watermelon King, and Extraordinary Adventures, among others. In 2003, Big Fish was adapted, of course, by Tim Burton and released as a film. In 2013, the book and the movie were sort of mishmashed together to become a Broadway musical. His novels have been translated into nearly 40 languages. His short stories have appeared in over 50 magazines and periodicals. And in 2019, he won the Harper Lee Award, which is an award given to a living, nationally recognized Alabama writer who has made a significant lifelong contribution to Alabama letters. Daniel Wallace is the J. Ross McDonald Distinguished Professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is also his alma mater. His first foray into nonfiction, which was just out today. Today is his pub day, and we're so grateful he's spending it here with us. That book is called This Isn't Going to End Well. It's a memoir about his friend, his mentor, his brother-in-law, in many ways his hero, who took his own life in 2001. The New York Times called the book a eulogy, a cautionary tale, a love letter, and a sob of anger. And BookPage, I think, summed it up best. They said, "This Isn't Going to End Well" outlines the complicated, tender truth about one mythical man. Daniel Wallace, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here, Mark.
Well, this is wonderful. And I was commenting on your beautiful office behind you. I just think it's not that it's premeditated, but it has just the right touch of kind of writerly order and writerly disorder.
Writerly order sounds like a contradiction in terms.
But it's beautiful. And for those who are listening on the podcast, check it out online later if you can. It's a great looking writerly office. All right. So there's an old saying that people say about books that they love, that the dream is that you finish the book, you close the book, and you just want to sit down and have a conversation with the author. And my dreams are coming true in that regard today, because I was really running it close to the wire here, and I finished reading this book about 90 minutes ago, and bang, here we are. I get to talk to you in person. This is frankly what I love so much about doing this show, getting to talk to authors about books that you love. And I will say, Daniel, that this book really caught me off guard. I don't read a lot of memoir, and I was gut punched by this book. I thought it was a masterclass in slow build tension about it was a masterclass in kind of dealing out just the right card at just the right time. And just when you think the story is one thing and you're comfortable in that, then it becomes a different thing. And then you say, okay, I'm comfortable now with what the story is. And then it becomes a different thing. Mm-hmm. And it was just as I said, a masterclass in how to unspool a story and a character of one man. And the other thing I'll say about it is I love this kind of classic setup, that it's like the kind of student talking about the teacher, the mere human talking about the superhuman, the chronicle of a great man. So anyway, so many things that we'll get into to love about this book. But tell us in your own words, what is This Isn't Going to End Well about?
It's a great question, and I've always tried to get this down to what they call the elevator pitch, and it's really difficult to do that in this book because so much is going on. It's the first memoir and probably the last memoir I'll ever write, but writing about somebody's life is really difficult. I mean, a life is a long time, even when it's just 48 years long, as Williams was. Um, Choosing what to keep in it, what to keep out of it, always very difficult. But really, it's about this man who showed me a different way of becoming in the world, a way that I never thought existed until, well, I was 12 years old and I saw him diving off the roof of our house. And that that example was just so, visceral, that even in my little 12-year-old brain, I saw this avenue that I never knew existed before. And so I follow that relationship, my life, and his life. And then, as the title of the book suggests, it's no surprise that he takes his own life. And you talked about, building the suspense. And it's difficult to build the suspense in a book where you already know how it's going to end up. And that was a real challenge for it. But really, that's not the story completely. It's the profound effect that somebody's life and death can have on another person and a lot of other people.
Right. And if you could, for our audience, just give us a picture of this larger than life figure who had such an effect on you. It's one thing to see him as a 12-year-old jumping off a roof, and that leaves quite an impression on a young boy. But there's a lot more here. I mean, by turns in the book, you compare him to Albert Camus, Keith Richards, Clint Eastwood, MacGyver. I mean, this just, it's hard to overstate what a remarkable man he was. And there again, you kept dealing out cards even late into the book when I was like, geez, he did that too. And he did that too. So give us a thumbnail sketch of William.
Well, I think that this bio that he wrote about himself, and part of it was tongue in cheek, but actually most of it is not, in which he describes who he was. And can I read? Do you mind if I read that?
Please do.
To me, it feels like this is this puts it all together. Neely has been a Boy Scout, an underground cartoonist, high school dropout, war register, civil rights activist, construction worker, mountain rescue specialist, garbage man, professional rock musician, police analyst, sculptor, spelunker, motorcyclist, bow hunter, paramedic, canoeist, kayaker, river guide, forklift driver, parachutist, author, real estate photographer, yachtsman, blah, 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 a drunk and drug addict, plus a few other things we can't mention until the statute of limitation runs out. Also a political cartoonist, illustrator, private detective, lifeguard. All this stuff is true. And he wasn't all of these things at the same time, but all through his life, he was presented with these challenges and he met them by doing them. Everything he did in his life, he taught himself how to do it. He didn't graduate from high school. He eventually went to Oxford, though they let him in, even though he hadn't had a degree. He went to St. John's College out west. These are the things that you looked at when you saw him. He had two pet copperheads. I mean, he read Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. I mean, it's just astounding, all the things he was.
And another key part of the book too is the impact he had on you, not just on the way that you viewed what a man is and what a fulfilling, adventurous life is, but also your calling to be a writer. You say late in the book, without William, I might be writing invoices instead of novels. And you just speak very beautifully in many parts of the book about how he paved the way for you to follow an artistic calling. And I just want to say that I think that this is such a key thing in the development of any artist. Being an artist is not, it's a very risky thing to do. It's not always a economically viable thing to do. It's often a very controversial thing to do. And without that kind of shelter, without that kind of mentor, somebody giving you cover, I think it's very hard to make the choice to become an artist. And he did that for you.
It is hard without having an example out there of what it could be like. Having this person in your life who you can look at and see they made this choice. And if they made it, I can make it too. Really, I mean, I don't think everybody does that. I think it's really difficult for a person who has no role model, no mentor, to take that path. And so, he provided me with this inspiration and just this sense of possibility that if he could do it, I mean, I could do it. I feel that way about myself now. I feel like, when I'm teaching and talking to other people who are ambitious or want to write, I say quite honestly, if I can do it, you can do it. It's nobody ever took me aside when I was coming up and said, "You're special, special gift. You're destined for whatever it is that a writer is destined for." It was not me at all. I was drawn to it, and I think that conceivably it could have been one of a number of artistic pursuits like this. I don't know. I think writing fit into who I was as a person better than any other artistic skill like that. William was a writer, but he was a cartoonist. He was a cartographer. He was an adrenaline sports fanatic. He's to this day, 40 years, I think, after he's published his last Whitewater book, he's still an icon. People still know who he is. And this book is going to be of interest to a lot of people in the Whitewater world. But I was not an adrenaline sports fanatic. I mean, I feel like, he was an outdoorsman. I'm an indoorsman. And so I could not do what he did. And a part of the book deals with what is the nature of influence. How is a person become who we are? Clearly, it's through interactions with the people in our lives. The genetic package we bring with us determines a lot of it. But I think, have the ability to move from one path to another through the experience that we have with other people. But you don't take that package in its entirety. I didn't want to be William. I knew that I could not be William, but I saw so much in him that I wanted to be, and I thought I could be. And part of that was this full, charging exploration of this side of me that was expressive and could in some way engage other people.
And I think that's an interesting place to segue to the other side of William's character, because he did influence you, but it was only one side of him that influenced you for a very long time. And it was what you saw of him and what he wanted you to see, and an image that he meticulously and almost manically and out of necessity crafted. And then what happens in the book, and I don't want to give too much away here because the book has so many layers, and it becomes towards the end, even there's true crime aspects of the book, which are just will have your guts in your throat. But I think it's fair to say that the key moment in this story is he was married to your sister. He commits suicide in 2001. A few years later, your sister passes away. And it's then that you discover his journals. And this is the moment when the book becomes something entirely different, and your image of him becomes something entirely different. And these journals, you quote them at length in the book. And the most moving single entry for me was, he writes in all caps, "I must not let them see who I am." And the way that you unpack this double self of his, this shadow self that he was wrestling with for his whole life, is just deeply, deeply moving. And so I guess the question I want to ask to you, maybe the way into this, is can you talk a little bit about that time and maybe even that moment when you start reading his journals and the effect that it had on you to see this hidden self of your hero?
Mhm. So much has happened in the years since I started working on this book, and you're right. Without these journals, without having discovered these journals, there would never be this book. I would never have written a book um, about William without having discovered this other William, the second William, that lived parallel to him. I had these journals that I found them in the back of a closet in my sister's house when she had died, and said we were doing what you do when people die, which is you get the stuff that people want, and then you throw away a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of stuff that becomes trash when a person dies. Things that are, half of this office will be going into the dumpster, I'm sure, because it just loses its value. But there's so much that doesn't. And in the back of a closet, I found this big box of William's journals. And I smuggled them out because we talked about it, my sisters and I, about whether it was a good idea to keep them and were they really ours to keep. They were his private journals, not for publication. So we decided not to keep them, and I kept them. I took them outside and put them in my car. Took them home, put them in a bookcase, and they were there for 2 years before I looked at them. All the while struggling with this idea of whether I had the right to read them. So obviously, I did finally come to the decision that I was a person that could be able to look at these, and that I really felt like he gave me a tacit permission by not destroying them, and Holly later not destroying them. And it's a long story and he had an opportunity. He planned out his suicide meticulously in the weeks come up to it. And he was very, very thoughtful, orderly guy. And he did not choose to destroy his journals. It was a conscious decision based on some of the notes. So at any rate, I started reading them, and I put them in order. And the first entry I have in his diary is when he's 21 years old, and even at that time he had suicidal ideation, which nobody knew anything about. And so immediately this changes your perspective of who somebody is in the world. And there's just, as I say in the book, the journals are the longest suicide note in the history of the world, because that is what they are. And his struggle to maintain this facade that he had created, meticulously created, based on all these people probably that I compare him to, James Dean, Camus, Clint Eastwood. And the first movie, the first thing I ever did with him that was just the two of us was to go see a Clint Eastwood triple header of the spaghetti westerns for a few dollars more, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And Clint Eastwood in those movies, he had about 8 words of dialogue, and he was this very, very scarred individual, but he was also a good man. There wasn't that toxic stuff, masculinity that we talk about. Over the course of the reading through all the journals and getting to know not who he really was, but the other side of who he was, then I was able to understand so much more clearly the choices that he made, which before I understood them, really felt unforgivable to me. What he did by dying by suicide, the people that he abandoned, especially my sister, who desperately needed him. I felt like there was no excuse, there was no explanation for it, and that's what the journals provided.
At a couple points, he says in his journals that he plans to destroy them. And then I think Holly, your sister, his wife, either she might say she wants to destroy them, or at the very least, she has the opportunity to destroy them. And so my question then is to you is, why do you think they weren't destroyed? And do you think that an outcome like this is what in some way William or Holly was after? And when I say an outcome like this, there's two things I can mean by that. One is that you personally, who was such an important figure in both their lives, would come to this understanding. And the other outcome is that you would even write a book about it. And so the world would have an understanding. Do you think any of that was in this decision to keep these journals around?
So he did write a note. One of the last to-do lists that he ever wrote was to make a DNR and to expurgate his journals. He doesn't ever say burn journals, dispose of journals. So the idea of expurgation implies that he doesn't want to get rid of all of them. He wants to get rid of some of them, but not all of them, or some of parts of them. So having had the opportunity to burn them, for instance, he consciously chose not to. To me, it speaks to, you know, the writerly dilemma. I mean, up until now, everything I've done is fiction, but it's clearly a presentation of myself. You know, even though I'm not in the books or don't feel like I'm in the books, I am in the books. I'm in every page of the books. I am writing these books. So by definition, it has to be an expression of myself. I think in whatever way we do it, we want to be known, right? Whether we're artists or not, I think that we all to some degree build up these facades and keep back some part of us from almost everybody, if not everybody. His situation was just, you know, much more intense and serious. So do we, though, at our hearts really want somebody to know us? And as hard as it is for us to let somebody in, I think we do. And I think that's one reason that those journals existed. And I do think that Holly, in some form or fashion, did want William's life to be known and understood. And whether it was me or someone else, I honestly don't know who else it could have been other than me, but you never know. She did say in an interview after he died that I think somebody should write a book about William's mind. And that's what this is.
And if you could just summarize, clearly you wrote an entire book about this, so it's going to be difficult to summarize, but you know, this dark side of William, like, what is it? How would you characterize this shadow self of his?
Yeah, it is lots of different things. It's a desperate sense of not being at home in the world anywhere. When he was a boy, he was this very thin, freckled redhead with thick glasses on that was a punching bag for the neighborhood. His mother was a little bit crazy, and his father died of alcoholism when he was 19. But as he grew, he became the man that I'm writing about in the book, but maintaining all the while this I don't want to say inner child because I'm not fond of that expression, but this self that he endured being throughout his early years stuck with him. He never left that behind. That insecurity, that fear, um, his desire to be loved but could not feel that love because he knew that people weren't really loving him. All the love that he got from all of us, he could transmute into something that wasn't love because he knew that it wasn't him that we loved because he was keeping so much of him away. So, so the respect that he got from his books, the iconic person that became in the especially in the whitewater world, the devotion of my sister, the love and the respect that my entire family had for him bounced right off of him because we didn't know him, and he knew that we didn't know him. He was prone to depression, and this. So his interior life, really being at odds with the exterior life that he had so craftily created, in order to protect himself, was really, I think, the main reason why he was incapable of continuing. We can't really live being two different things. And that's what he was trying to do. And I thought when he did die by suicide at 48 that it was a cowardly maneuver, or that he was taking the easy way out. But the truth was, having read his journals, that he had wanted to do this every day for over 25 years. And the fact that he was able to live that long was, in fact, I felt, like a heroic deed in and of itself.
It is so moving to hear how you describe him now and also in the book. And I wonder, and his struggle, this hidden struggle. And I wonder how your opinion of suicide has changed in the writing of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, people, it's different, for everybody. But suicide is a secret that people hold on to and rarely share with anybody close to them, because they know that once they do, people are going to try to take that secret away from them. Right. So there's a power that that this emotion has. The more secret it is, the more powerful it is. So, and the more powerful it is, the less likely you are to share that secret with anybody else. If you don't talk to people, if you don't share these feelings that you're having, the chances increase that you're going to be moving towards this darker place. The lesson, I feel like, of William and the issues that I was faced with as I was understanding him, is that we all have this second self, this shadow self. And if we don't, we have to look at other people and know that, right? We have to know that no matter who they are, no matter what they appear to be, we have to know that that's there, and assume a kind of an understanding that they're not allowing us to fully to see, but we have to assume that's there. And without it, we won't really understand what people do, the actions, and that's the only way that we can truly know somebody superficially, is what they do. And William's case is exaggerated, but at the same time applicable to all of us.
This, I think, this probing of who people are on the surface and who people are really, and the fictions and illusions that we tell ourselves to create an illusion of self, both for ourselves and for other people. This has been something of a preoccupation, I think, in your work. This is a topic which is endlessly fascinating to you. In fact, I think in the book, I had made this observation and I thought I was smart for making it, but then you just came right out and said it. You said, all my books are about people pretending to be something they are not. And of course, I think a lot of people come to your work first through Big Fish and the film Big Fish, just a real classic of American literature and cinema. And that book, of course, is about a son trying to figure out a father who is spinning tales about who he is, and the son trying to get to the truth at the heart of a family member's life. And that last sentence that I just said could just be grafted on to this book as well. And I just wanted you to unpack that for a moment. Why is that almost the topic for you?
Mm-hmm. I can't speak for all writers, but I never really know what I'm writing about when I'm doing it. It's only after I've done it and looking back at what I've done, do I start to understand aspects of what I've done, and what are my themes? What are the things? And themes is just one word for what you're into, what you're interested in, what you're drawn to as a writer. Because I think we all do have these. I think all writers have a focus, and it's not conscious, right? It's just what happens. And my father, who there was it is a father-son relationship that we're talking about in Big Fish, was always somebody who was very fascinating to me, in that he was, as they say, a self-made man. And self-made men, and William was a self-made man too, but there's something, we really applaud that when, as we should, but when you are creating yourself, you're not creating yourself out of nothing. And so and parents themselves, so much of their important part of their life occurs before you're even born. You don't know anything. You don't know your parents. I mean, those are the last people, I think, that you know. So so this attraction to that story began with Big Fish, and I think discovering that, albeit unconsciously, was the door that allowed me to become a writer. I'd written 5 books before Big Fish that didn't have anything to do with any of this, and they really weren't that good at all. They were terrible. And a Big Fish was a breakthrough book because I allowed myself to write about the things that I was interested in. Now, your question is why, and I would say, well, I mean, I could say that it has, clearly it's that I don't. That's how I engineer my own life, is like the presentation of the self that I'm giving you now is so unlike the person who I really am. And honest to God, I don't think that's true. I think I'm just an open book. Like I don't have a shadow life. I must, but I feel kind of simple, like one dimensional. Like this is me. But I look at my books and I see that. Mr. Sebastian, the Negro Magician, there is no Negro magician in the book. This book takes place in the 50s, and it's somebody pretending to be something that they're not. But I'm wondering, again, is coming back to that idea of influence, and the 2 people in the world who influence me the most are my father and William. 2 people who could not have been more different but on the other hand, were identical. My father told stories about his own life, completely fabricated, and at a certain point, you tell, as we all know from our current political situation, you tell a lie, over and over and over again, it becomes true.
Mm.
And yet it doesn't take a lot of legwork to discover the truth behind these stories. I can only surmise that it's this influence of my father and William, and this gift that a novelist has by nature, which is, this is our opportunity as a novelist, is to just explore somebody in their entirety. So, in other words, I would not be a good subject for a novel. I don't know that there's a lot there, but
that's just what you'd say if you had a shadow self you really wanted to hide.
You're onto me, Mark. That's why you do what you do.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit in the time we have left about why you wrote the book now, and sort of a little bit about the creative process. And thank you, everybody who's watching, for your comments. We will have we'll have time for a few of your questions in a few moments. I sometimes think about the creative process and telling stories and making art out of one's emotions, and art as emotional autobiography. And I think about sort of the timing of that, and like, when is the right time to take something that has happened to you, an experience, and either turn it into a factual memoir, turn it into a kind of thinly veiled, fictional story, which is clearly about your emotional inner life. And the metaphor I sometimes use is about fossil fuels, in that, like, the fuel that burns really hot is oil that used to be a forest and then has been pressed down into the earth and cooked over eons and pressurized, and then it comes back to the surface and it burns white hot, versus something that sort of has just happened to me today, which is just like some grass growing out on my lawn. It's like, try making a fire out of that grass. No, it needs to go under. It needs to cook. It needs to have its energy pressurized and come to the surface. Anyway, whether you agree with that metaphor or not, the question I have for you is, here we are in 2023. He committed suicide in 2001. You've had access to his journals for at least a decade. And yet here we have this book only now. And so the question is, why? When? How did you know this was the moment to kind of burn that fuel?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think that's a great analogy. I think that's the way it works for me in all of my work. For instance, I've lived in North Carolina for most of my life, almost all of it. The first 18 years of my life, I lived in Alabama, and have gone back periodically since then. But after I was 18, I left and lived somewhere else, most of that time in North Carolina. I've never written a story that takes place in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's too soon.
Mm-hmm.
I just write about Alabama. I just that's what I see in my mind's eye when I'm creating a space for my characters to dwell in. So that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. And I don't think I could ever write about anything that just happened. I'm not interested in it. There's so much time that has elapsed in my life to write about. I don't see the why I would be interested in something that just happened last month. This book, though, is completely different in significant ways, which is, it's about real people. That is, people who lived and died, and who had family, who had friends. This book could not have been written by me if some of these people were alive. Obviously, William and Holly, I would never be able to have written this book or wanted to write it if either of them were alive. But then my parents are dead. His parents are dead. He was an only child. I have two sisters, one younger sister and one older sister, and they read the book, of course, and they helped me with facts and some moments in it, but they really liked the book. It was important for me, but I could not have written a book that would in any way hurt someone else. There's just, as I said just a second ago, there's too much to write about that is not hurtful. There's no story that I feel like I have to tell, and I don't care if Mark Cecil is, if it ruins his life, I'm writing this story. It's not this. I just don't feel like that's what art is supposed to do. So William's suicide was one of, if not the seminal event of my life, and there's a lot of dust that has to settle before that happens. And then really this discovery of the journals, again, really, really volatile and personal information that I'm reading there. It is either going to scare me away from a story or it's going to draw me to it. And it drew me to this because his story is an important story, a great story to tell as a writer. But it's also, I felt like in the back of my mind that this could be a book that's about grief, that's about our shadow selves, that a lot of people would be able to read and be able to understand and get some clarity on things through reading it.
And one last question before we go to audience questions, just very quickly. A lot of writers I know struggle with the question, should I write memoir or should I write fiction? And often what they write is something which is, a kind of middle road, which is a thinly veiled kind of autobiographical novel. You've done both. You're fresh off your first nonfiction foray here. What's your advice to people who are thinking about their material and wondering, should it be a memoir? Should it be fiction?
Well, again, it's different for everybody, but the differences between the two are very significant, which I discovered as I was doing this very first memoir. There's a lot of imagination and creativity that goes into writing a memoir, but there's a lot you have to deal with that you can't change, right? Most of it, either they lived in Birmingham or they didn't. They either had a dog or they didn't. You just can't. I've had characters have an animal for 50 pages and realize, oh, they don't need an animal, and just get rid of the animal. You can't do that. I had to become a different kind of writer. So I feel like they almost use different parts of your brain. One reason this took so long is that this book took years and years. I had to learn how to write the facts. I had to learn how to tell a story that's circumscribed by the truth, the factual truth. And in a novel, you're not working with the factual truth. You're working with an emotional truth, or a different kind of truth that you have a responsibility in a memoir to tell the truth as well as you can. And it's not a biography, obviously, but it is supposed to be true. Whereas in a novel, I feel like you're able to take aspects of your own life clearly, because everything is based on some form of experience. You're able to mold them in ways that a memoir can't. And so I don't think I'm going to write another memoir. I don't think I have a story, but I'll definitely write some more fiction.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. All right, let's go to a few audience questions if we could. So this question is, it takes an act of remarkable courage to write a book this honest. What has been the result on you as a person as well as a writer?
as I wrote this book and wrote and learned how to write this book, it went through so many incarnations, and I went through so many incarnations while I was doing it. Initially, this obviously it's never happened before, and I'm really kind of embarrassed to say this, but when I first started writing the book, when I first took a lot of the research, which is reading William's journals, and started writing it as a story, it was it was so painful for me that I was, I was crying in the beginning because I was taking a
Mm.
living person, and putting him on a page. I was turning him into a story, which um, you have to do no matter what you're writing, because I'm not writing it for me. I'm writing it for you, and it has to say something, and it has to be compelling. And this whole idea of taking somebody's life and turning it into a compelling memoir for readership was really painful. Then over the years, I had to take a step back from that and see this as a creation, a work of art, hopefully, that my emotions were not as important as the reader's emotions. And that's always true, I think, with writers, is that you have to think more about the reader than the writer. And I don't have, when I publish a novel, people generally just talk about the book itself. It's different here, is that people will say, "I'm sorry for your loss," which I didn't expect, really. You know, there's a lot of loss in this book. So it is something that you would, if somebody told you about it, you would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But I didn't expect that. And that to me is interesting.
It's clear reading this book how much you must have gone through. What an emotional odyssey it was. I will say that, almost even more than sorry for your loss. I mean, just sorry is not even the right word, but just a recognition of, an acknowledgement of what you went through with this entire decades long friendship and experience. Let's have another question from the audience. This is from John. Thank you for watching, John. A question: did Daniel's consideration of William's life offer any insights on writers such as Ernest Hemingway, Hunter Thompson, or David Foster Wallace, who also took their own lives? Great question, John.
Yeah. William had a lot, his life and death had some interesting eerie similarities to Ernest Hemingway's. They were both adrenaline junkies. They both could put themselves in harrowing situations that we would never think about doing. But as each of them aged, that physicality, which was so important to them, was robbed. That the exterior selves, which we understand them to be, William kayaking, mountain biking, mountain climbing, Ernest Hemingway, a soldier, a hunter. They both started to have their bodies fell apart, and when you are no longer able to engage in pursuits that take you outside of yourself. And I think that's one thing that William definitely did, and I think Hemingway as well, is that the more active you can be, the more outward looking you can be, the less you have to look at who you are inside. And once that's robbed from you, once that's taken from you, you have no choice, but you're stuck with this self that you haven't nurtured, that nobody knows, that you can't bear to live with, honestly. And that's the parallel to me that was really striking with those other people. I'm not really as know as much about, but
Thank you, John. Great question. All right, let's do one more audience question before we wrap. Do you believe spiritually that William is out there somewhere and knows about this book? Thank you for that question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I talk about this a little bit in the book, especially, I mean, towards the end. But I will, and I'm on the fence about it. There are a lot of, and I talk about this. I think it's hard. It would be hard to really fully address that question here, just because of the time constraints. Because we could talk forever on that. But I will tell you that when I was writing this book, I had a dream where William came up to me, and just like we're talking here, he came up to me and he said, I know I'm dead, but please don't write this book. And I want to say, we all dream about, dreams, anything can happen in a dream. I can explain that in lots of different ways. Because, of course I was afraid, I was afraid of writing this book. What I say here, that William came to me in a dream and told me not to write his book? I don't know. There was a peacock at the end of the story, which I looked at and I thought, oh, this is Holly and this is William. This peacock is actually my sister and William in this big bird, in this big white peacock. But were they, my wife and I talk about this all the time. Her position is, I don't know. She says, you don't know. So what do you, which way? I don't have any proof either way. I find it very hard for myself to admit to this, to a spiritual reality, because it opens the doors to so many other things that I just can't handle. So I'm trying to close the door to that. But, we do, as thematically, what we've talked about in the show a lot are our shadow selves. And just between you and me, Mark, I have a feeling that there is something inside of me that wants to believe in that I'm not allowing myself to.
Well, my personal feeling is that if he is out there somewhere, I hope anyway, that he'd be satisfied with this book. And thank goodness for this book. It was a completely enriching and moving experience for me as a reader. So I'm quite grateful that you wrote this book. And in some way, I hope William is too.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to end here on one final question that I love to ask all the writers that come on the show, which is that imagine, Daniel, that somebody has just read this book. In fact, frankly, much like me, and has only recently finished this book, and they get to the end, they close the book and they look out the window. And if you could, in a phrase or even just one word, what is the feeling that you would hope you left this reader with?
Illumination. Self-illumination, and an illumination which leads to our better understanding of everyone we're close to, everyone we don't know. That's what I feel like, that finally this book, this is the little message that is that this book is bringing to you, hopefully.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you. Daniel, this has been so great. I also just want to say on a personal note, what a big influence Big Fish had on me as a person, as a reader, as a writer as well. And just what an honor it is to have read this book, which to me is just such a wonderful book and such a different book. And it's just been a great privilege to have you on the show. So thanks for being here today.
I've enjoyed myself so much. Thank you.
Great. And thank you, everybody who tuned in and listened. Please come back soon, watch our other shows on A Mighty Blaze, and tune in every Tuesday at 2 for The Thoughtful Bro. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Daniel.